All right, Mike, thank you. Houston voters will head to the polls this Saturday to pick a new mayor. State Representative Sylvester Turner and businessman Bill King are the two candidates in the runoff. We invited each candidate to appear on Fox 26 this morning. Turner declined the invitation. I'm joined by senior legal analyst Chris Tritico now, and we are joined by Bill King to talk about several of the big issues. Good morning.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Thanks for being here.
Good.
So, Bill, you finished 6 points behind Turner in the election in November, trying to be the first conservative mayor we've had in decades in Houston. So how do you plan to win and unite Republicans and Democrats?
Well, I think that our basic message, which is back to basics, has resonated across the entire community. And we've been endorsed by a lot of Democrats in the runoff. Chris Bell, we were endorsed by about 30 or 40 African-American Latino ministers this last week. It was endorsed by Willie D., the rapper, yesterday, who's interested in these neighborhood issues. You know, the city's just not doing a very good job of delivering the basic services for the city. And people are frustrated with that, and it's whether you're, you know, in Kingwood or Sunnyside, whether you're black, white, Hispanic, whether you're liberal or conservative, you know, people are tired of the potholes.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about the pensions issue. That's really the major issue, I think, in the campaign all year long. Your plan is to move them over to defined benefit plans, which would require legislative action.
Defined contributions.
I'm sorry, defined contribution plans. Right. Excuse me, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Sylvester Turner wants to maintain what we're doing. Does your plan end up costing more at the end and or less benefits for those receiving them?
Well, first of all, we really don't know what Sylvester wants to do because he's never said what he wants to do. Defined contributions absolutely reduce benefits for new employees, and that's what I've always said is we need to move this to new employees. This is what private industry did 2 or 3 decades ago. They moved from defined benefit to defined contributions. They came up with a transition plan where it started with new employees, and then over a period of time you work out of these plans, and that's the same thing we need to do. These plans are just not sustainable. They, you know, they took $400 million to fund them last year. They just released a report from the firefighter pension fund a few days ago. The average benefit earned by the firefighters that retired last year, 76 with 30 years of service, first of all, the average retirement age was 54. The average benefit was a lump sum distribution of $813,000 plus $58,000 a year for life with a 3% guaranteed COLA adjustment every year.
Not a bad deal.
Well, it's, if you add it up for a life expectancy of 84, which is the life expectancy they use in their tables, that's $3.5 million.
But isn't that the one that we need the legislature to assist us in, and they won't vote on it? It's been twice, Mayor Parker's been there, and the legislature won't address it.
Well, actually, all 3 plans are written into state law, so we're going to have comprehensive across the board. But by the way, the mayor's never been there. And in fact, when Jim Murphy introduced a bill last time that said would return local control, the mayor sent the city lobbyists up to lobby against that bill.
Okay.
So if you're gonna go to Austin and say we need to change this, we need comprehensive solution, then they want to know that you're actually solving the problem for all 3 plans. They want to know that the entire Houston community is behind it. And the mayor's got to be standing there leading that charge.
Bill, let's move on and talk about roads. You're in favor of getting rid of the drainage fee and reworking Rebuild Houston. How do you rework it, though, so that we can take care of these road problems that have just lingered for years and years and years?
So what's happened for the last 2 or 3 administrations is that we've taken money that we historically spent on infrastructure and moved it over to balance the general fund. There's pressure in the general fund, primarily from the pension, but other issues came about. If you go back to as late as 2005, we were reconstructing about 375 lane miles a year in Houston. And if you take that, we've got 16,000 miles, you need to do them once every 40 years. That comes at about 400 miles a year. So we were kind of close to what you need to do. Last year we did 105 miles. That's why our street's in such terrible condition. So we've got to get control of the general fund and stop siphoning money off infrastructure over the general fund. That's the fundamental problem. Now, Rebuild Houston was supposed to do that. The problem is the language was written so poorly that the administration was able to keep doing the same thing that we've been doing before. We're now paying for 550 full-time employees out of the dedicated street and drainage fund, and no one ever thought that's what was going to happen to that money.
Now, I've heard you say that you don't like the drainage fund, the fee, and if you do away with that, which is the major funding source for Rebuild Houston, how do you keep Rebuild Houston?
So there's actually about 4 or 5 different sources of money that go into the dedicated street and drainage fund. The drainage fee is about 40% of the money that goes in there. The important part of that plan was that as we pay off bonds, the money that was going to pay those bonds would be put into that dedicated fund so they couldn't be siphoned off for the general fund purposes. That was the real important part of Rebuild Houston, something I was always in favor of. And by the way, it only moved a part of it. We have about 15 or 16 cents of our tax rate that currently goes to pay debt. They were only moving 11.8 cents. I'd be in favor of making sure the whole thing went back in infrastructure, and that would more than make up for the drainage fee.
Bill, we're almost out of time, but I want you to talk a little bit about the Houston Police Department and what your plans are there to make it more efficient and more effective.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. The Houston Police Department is only catching about 6% of the burglars right now, and that's one of the lowest averages in the country. The stat that I find most alarming is we're only solved 25% of the rape cases. The national average is 50%. Last year we had 600 unsolved rape cases. You know, this is a crime that is obviously very difficult to come forward and report. There's trauma associated with just going through the reporting process. And to think there's only a 1 in 4 chance of it being solved, to me, that's a dereliction of our responsibility as a civilized community to those victims. We've got to have a police department management, that catching criminals is what they are charged with doing and what they're measured against. Nobody's doing that. No, you don't ever hear the mayor talking about why are you only solving 6% of the burglars? Why are you only solving 24%? Every time we talk about the police department, they immediately come up and say, hey, we don't have enough officers. We need more money to hire more officers. But that budget's doubled in the last 10 years, and yet we have fewer officers. This is a management issue.
We're going to have to leave it there. We appreciate you joining us today. Bill King will face Sylvester Turner in the runoff election scheduled for next Saturday.